Welcome to the New Mexico Philharmonic's Wednesday Night Live. We have three wonderful musicians tonight. They all live in Albuquerque, New Mexico. We'll start by listening to Edwin Light perform a piece by Robert Schumann, our featured composer for tonight's show. I have the honor of having three wonderful musicians for this show tonight. Barbara Rivers, who is a violinist from the New Mexico Philharmonic, David Schepps, a cellist from the New Mexico Philharmonic, and our guest, Edwin Light, a pianist who's also a resident of Albuquerque. Good evening, folks.
Good evening.
Hello. Great to have you in our Wednesday Night Live, and I'm thrilled to be able to talk to you about your lives and what you've been doing. And of course, Robert Schumann, the great composer whom we're focusing on tonight. But let's start about you guys. Barbara, you are originally from Tulsa.
Correct.
And you have you studied at Curtis, and then you came over to Albuquerque for UNM. But tell us, how did you end up in New Mexico? Did you just stayed after you finished your studies?
Well, what happened is that I went to Aspen Festival Orchestra one summer, and I met someone there, and they said, "Well, stop by Albuquerque on your way back." So I did, and Lenny Thelberg was there, and the conductor of the symphony was there, and they said, "Well, we can offer you a graduate assistantship and a position." So I came, and you know how it is with life. You think, oh, this will be a while, and then I'll move on. And I never did. You know, I stayed here.
Fantastic. How about you, David? Are you originally from New York? I see that you went to several schools in New York City, Mannes School of Music, studied, you got your doctoral thesis defending on Fournier's Beethoven's technique and interpretation. Tell us about your background and how you ended up in New Mexico.
Yeah, I grew up in New Jersey, a suburb of New York City. My mother was a pianist, and she'd already been involved in New York City music life. So she sent us to Manhattan School of Music pre-college when I was in high school. And then I went to, for my bachelor's, Mannes College. Then I got offered a graduate assistantship at Arizona State University. And that led to further study with Fournier. My teacher there had been his student as well. And I actually got a job in Mexico when I graduated in Veracruz. And they let me take some time off to take some lessons with Fournier. And then I applied for a Fulbright type grant. And when I got that, I was able to spend a whole year with Mr. Fournier in Geneva, Switzerland. And then I did some work at the Banff Center in Canada and started my DMA at Arizona. Began applying for college jobs. And I started in Louisiana, Lafayette, Louisiana, University of Southwestern Louisiana, then Wichita State for 10 years there. Where I was principal of Wichita Symphony, and we had a faculty string quartet. And at that point, I was finishing up the doctorate, and my committee agreed that since I had had that experience with Fournier, that would be a perfect project. So I went back to his home in Geneva and studied all the Beethoven works, and that's what I wrote my paper about. And then saw this opening in New Mexico. I loved the Southwest. I'd visited here as a child. I won the job at UNM, and I was very happy to have some old friends here, like David Lockington at the symphony and a few of the players in the orchestra. I was able to join the New Mexico Symphony the same year I started teaching, and I've been there ever since.
We're very privileged to have both of you as our musicians. And Edwin, how did you end up in Albuquerque?
Oh, yeah. Well, originally I grew up in Tennessee. High school piano teacher recommended I go to Cincinnati. So I went to the Cincinnati College Conservatory of Music, where I completed an undergraduate and a graduate degree in piano. From there, I ended up teaching at a university in Illinois, Western Illinois University, for many years, and then moved to Boston to complete a DMA degree at Boston University. While I was there, I taught at Fitchburg State University in the humanities program. And then from Boston, with my partner, we were weary of all the snow in the wintertime, and we chose to come to the Southwest and ultimately ended up here in Albuquerque. We're very happy with our choice.
Now, this fantasy piece for piano trio is really an amazing work. I mean, Schumann wrote well for all instruments. I mean, he was even fond of the French horn. And of course, he was very fond of cello, violin, and piano, which was his own instrument. But is this a piece that you all have performed many times? Let's talk about your experience with Robert Schumann, who is the focus of tonight's show.
Actually, this is the first time I played the piano trio. It's David who picked this music. He says, well, let's do this. I haven't performed this in a while, so.
Oh, it was discovery for me also. Turns out he's written at least 3 sets of fantasy pieces. I was familiar with the duo, cello and piano, which also can be clarinet and piano. They're 4 pieces. All we had to do was play through it the first time, and I was in love with this music. I'm a big Schumann fan too, and it's so expressive and so intimate, and he understands the instrument so well. And I said, yeah, we have to do this.
How about Edwin? Of course, you've played many of his solo works, but Schumann, I mean, he wrote amazingly, because he died at age 46, quite young, but he wrote symphonies, he wrote chamber music, many solo works for piano, over 200 love songs that he dedicated to his beautiful wife, Clara Wieck. But how about your experience, Edwin?
As well, I've enjoyed the fantasy pieces as well. I had not played them before, but there's some interesting challenges, both for the pianist alone as well as coordinating with the other instruments. I started playing Schumann early on in my life. I played the fantasy, one of the longer works, and the symphonic etudes and other pieces as well, and found that I was playing mostly Schumann along the way. And people said, well, why don't you play some Chopin? But I said, no, I really love these pieces. I love this style that he's created. It's been enchanting all along the way, and I've enjoyed it immensely. And I've really enjoyed working with these two on the fantasy pieces.
Now, Schumann is said to have had several mental health problems, and probably he would be diagnosed as a bipolar disorder. So at the times where he was really enthusiastic and full of energy, then he would just compose for several days nonstop. And that's the case even with his first symphony, the Spring Symphony, which he composed the entire symphony in only 4 days. You know, it's just such a phenomenal work of music, full of energy and full of passion. I had the chance of living in Leipzig, which was one of Schumann's most important cities. That's where he studied, that's when he went to school, where he met Clara Wieck, and where he became very good friends with Mendelssohn, and of course with Johannes Brahms later in his life.
Yeah, we talked about his mental health problems. I mean, I think all musicians do, because it's interesting, but it's also a sad story. And considering how much we know today about diagnosis and treatment, to try to imagine in his time how little was known or how much misconception there was, the more I learn about it, the more I realize how much he suffered, both in his marriage and other relationships, and cutting his career short. And it's still unimaginable to me what a mental hospital would have been like back then. And this poor man, ultimately surrendered himself to this demon inside. Maybe it contributed to his composing gifts, for all we know. A lot of great works have been written under emotional duress.
Now, Barbara, you have been a member of the New Mexico Symphony for many years, and now the New Mexico Philharmonic. And I'm sure you have performed not only the symphonies, the piano concerto, and other works of Schumann. Do you have any particular recollection of your work now as a violinist in the orchestra?
I particularly like Schumann's Fourth Symphony. I just like the way all the instruments just come together and play to, the melodies and the harmonies, and it just flows through.
Can you tell us, why did you choose the violin, Barbara? Was there a specific story or something that really inspired you to become a violinist?
Well, when I grew up in Tulsa, at that time, most people played piano, and I did start on piano, but when I was in elementary school, when I was in 5th grade, they offered violin, and so I just took to it and started taking private lessons right away. But it's interesting how those things happen, because my parents were musicians, and if I hadn't had that opportunity, I would have never played violin.
Of course, all the Beethoven violin sonatas, Brahms violin sonatas are all very popular. Schumann's violins works are not the most popular ones. Just take, for instance, his concerto, which is very rarely performed. Now, what was your experience with the sonata in A minor?
I really like that sonata. Actually, Edwin was the one who picked Schumann because he felt like the piano part was easier to get together. But I must admit that the way things went together was truly great. It wasn't just melodies. The whole piece was written as one. Once you start on a movement, it just goes through the whole thing, but playing the melodies back and forth and being part of the other instrument that's playing.
It all blends together. The texture blends so well in the composer's mind, and then on in the manuscript itself. Feels right.
He wrote a lot for the cello, right? Several pieces for cello and piano, a cello concerto. And besides all the original works of Schumann for cello and piano, you even borrowed a piece he wrote for my original instrument, the French horn, which is the Adagio and Allegro, which is more commonly played by cellists than French horn players. But what is your relationship with the works of Schumann?
Oh, I love them. I mean, I think for cellists in general, they're really one of the big centerpieces of our repertoire, in part because we don't have a concerto from Brahms and Beethoven or Mozart. Regardless, Schumann is such a genius and emotional melody writer. It's one beautiful line after another. I mean, the Schumann is one of our top concertos, and you can study it your whole life and never tire of it. And we're very fortunate to have the cello piano pieces. I don't know, I think we naturally think he wrote them for cello and you borrowed them, but I guess I'm wrong, huh? Because the clarinets play the fantasy piece, and the horn, I guess, works very well with Adagio and Allegro. I mean, the intervals in the register. I mean, I love to hear it on horn. We add little things like, tremolos in the fantasy pieces and some extra notes here and there. It's just brilliant music. And I've always been fascinated by Schumann. And then there's all the chamber music. There's quartets and trios as well. And we're lucky, yeah.
I remember that I had this LP of Rostropovich and Martha Argerich, and I really learned how to perform Schumann's Adagio and Allegro for the horn after I heard Rostropovich's recording, which is so free and is so passionate, and then I realized that's how you should play it, because of course, the brass players can sometimes be very concerned about the precision, note precision, and just the technical aspects. But when you listen to, two monsters like Rostropovich and Argerich, it's only about the music, right? It's just so passionate and it's so exuberant. So that's something that I remember very fondly of that recording. And of course, I had the chance of listening to both of them perform live, which was also a wonderful experience. One of the advantages of being in places like New York City or Boston, or that you get, to see these artists quite frequently. Who are some of your favorite performers in your instruments?
Well, for the Schumann Sonata, which is included in our recording, is played by Kramer and Argerich. And stunning, absolutely stunning performance. Every lick along the way, okay, it's kind of amazing because they have their own twist on how to deliver a particular phrase. So that was very stimulating to me. The other thing that I wanted to mention, I have played the Dichterliebe, I played Von Liebe und Leben, Liederkreis, all these wonderful song cycles created by Robert Schumann, because he was not only a wonderful composer, but he knew his poetry. He responded and from his gut with literature of the day in which he lived. So the Heine setting of Dichterliebe and so on was very, very engaging for me years ago. And I thoroughly enjoyed the poetry. And I wanted to mention, because it's included in the recordings, that he, prior to his marriage to Clara, was actually a very difficult time in the 1830s because Clara's father did not want them to marry.
Right.
He thought Schumann would amount to nothing in his lifetime and could not possibly be worthy of his talented daughter, who was also the queen of his piano studio and had already started a concert career of her own. And in the 1830s, Schumann was not allowed to speak to her, to meet her face to face. Schumann came up with a solution. How can I communicate? How can I let her know how I feel during this time? So he tucked into the end of the fantasy for solo piano. At the end of the first movement, he tucked in a tune from An die ferne Geliebte, To the Distant Beloved, a set of songs by Beethoven. And he knew that Clara would recognize the melody and she would know the words. And I wanted to share just a few of the words with you. Now I'm far away from you. Mountain and valley intervene between us and our peace, our happiness and our pain. Ah, you cannot see the fiery gaze that wings its way towards you, and my sighs are lost in the space that comes between us. So
that's gorgeous.
She hears that tune and she knows the words. So heartfelt communication.
It's really beautiful. And when he was involved with Clara for a period of 2 years, he wrote nothing but love songs, over 200 of them. I mean, if that isn't real love, what is, right?
Yeah.
So Barbara, do you have a violinist who you're very fond of and that you go back to and listen to and that inspires you?
Well, I must say I have a connection to Perlman. I've been to his master classes before. And actually, I'm so glad that last February, I guess it was, he came with a pianist to Las Cruces on a tour. And I'm so glad that my daughter and I went because he's at the age where I don't think he's going to go any more tours. And of course, there's no touring starting in March and even now. I just love his playing. I love his personality and what he has given to violin.
He's amazing.
Yeah.
I remember I lived on the same street as Itzhak Perlman, 89th and Riverside Drive. And I was very good friends with his daughter, Nava, who was attending Julia Pre-College. And often you would go, and on the same building, Pinka Zuckerman also lived on the same building. So often you would pass by and you hear these wonderful guys practicing, on their brownstone. and it was just amazing. David, tell me about your favorite cellist. Of course, Fournier, whom you had close contact with, you know, was one of the best cellists in his time. Besides Fournier, who are other cellists that you love to listen to?
I like to go back to the past. I mean, Fournier, of course, his interpretations of everything intrigue me and is what's always drawn me to him. I think with Schumann especially, I would say Beethoven as well, he has a way of articulating, there's speech along with the singing, like you're talking about this passage is a melody you sing, but this is more like just conversation and lots of subtle nuances of bow and left hand, and you know, almost as if you're hearing words coming out of the instrument. And recording of Schumann is spectacular in that way. My other favorite is going back even further, and it's Pablo Casals. Also has a historic recording of Schumann. Is so powerful, and I always like to tell this anecdote to students, especially the young ones haven't been hearing Casals. There's a famous sequence of runs that go up to a very high note and a pause before the highest climactic note. And at that moment before the note, Casals lets out a grunt, and it's on the recording. And it almost seems like it's part of the piece now. And whenever I hear it, I mean, he felt it in his gut, and then you feel it in response to him. And I have to say, Leonard Rose is one of my big favorites. I think he brought the tone of the cello to an incredible level of fullness and beauty of sound. You know, modern times, there's just been a flood of fantastic cellists from all over the world. Thinking, Misha Maisky, Johannes Moser, German-Canadian cellist, spectacular players. Of course, Lynn Harrell, which we sadly lost recently, just played the cello like it was a violin. I mean, his control of the instrument and expression, he really created his own style that's very compelling. At least those and lots more.
He's a wonderful cellist. Of course, Pablo Casals, unfortunately, I did not have a chance to hear live. Lynn Harrell, I had the opportunity of working with him, such a gentleman and what a great artist. How blessed and privileged we are that we get to perform the great music of these magnificent composers, such as Robert Schumann. You know, I never forget the time when Kurt Masur turned to me. I was 20 years old, and he said, "Roberto, you know, we have the best profession in the world." And at that time, I didn't quite understand what he was trying to tell me, because I said, no, certainly there are better professions. But now at age 53, I finally come to the conclusion, and I agree totally, that we're so blessed to do what we do, to work with something that's one of the most beautiful human achievements, to make music like you have done tonight, and also to bring that to the audience that enjoys it so much. So I miss being in Albuquerque with our great audience, with our great orchestra, making great music. I hope that soon we'll be able to do that. Anytime soon we'll be together again. Thank you so much for participating in our show tonight.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And please stay safe, stay healthy, enjoy your time in Albuquerque, beautiful Albuquerque. Now that the weather is getting warmer and warmer, beautiful springtime, like the Schumann Spring Symphony. Just, I wish you all the energy and the good vibes and all the best that springtime can bring to us. May God bless us all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Roberto.
Thank you.